Okay, here we go. All right, everyone, welcome. We are here to talk about extensions and alterations as far as AICS administrative procedures go. Sorry, I wasn't able to join y'all at the last one of these sessions, but I heard from Dr. Dolan that everything went smoothly and you guys were eager to see the new forms coming out for the academic program review process. We've already got a couple of folks who have reached out and said, hey, we really want to start using the forms with our faculty. And so we are finalizing that and we're going to share it out with the academic contacts today or tomorrow, hopefully today though. And that way you all have access to them. It's not going to be mandatory at this point, but we do want you to feel confident about the forms you're using to get the information organized on your campuses. Okay, does anybody have questions before we get started? No? All right. Well, we got a full house today. Like I said, we're going to be talking about extensions and alterations. This conversation has been going on for a while. In fact, when I was preparing for today, I was looking back at some previous drafts that were dated almost exactly a year ago. It's taken us a little while to be able to get through our punch list of academic procedures that we need to update. So the extensions and alterations it's now their turn. They're coming up in the queue. And we've had 2 open forums about this already. And let me just briefly share my screen to give you a PowerPoint of where we're at, help remind us of the conversation that we've had up to this point. Okay, I'm going to share the whole screen. That way I can move my files around. Okay, y'all with me? You can see my PowerPoint. I know it's not in slide mode, but it's very difficult to manage when it's in slide mode. So right now we're talking about AICS chapter 300-106, which is called Reasonable Extensions and Alterations of Existing Units and Programs of Instruction. And those of you who are really in the weeds and have been following along know that we're taking out the units. We have already dealt with the units. They are now going to be included in the instructional role chapter, which was just finalized at the last AIC meeting in September. So we don't have to deal with units in this chapter anymore, which is excellent. So the changes to reasonable extensions and alterations happened in 2018 to actually take many of the items that used to be up for approval with the commission and move them to notification only. And we're not talking about reversing any of those changes. And those who have been around for a while remember the agendas used to be so long when substantive changes similar to what SACS does were reviewed one by one at the commission, and no one is proposing to go back to that. So what we're looking at is, like I said, taking units and role for another section. Program status. So program status, that's whether your program is active, inactive, or deleted, and wanting to move that into the next section, which already exists and kind of already deals with that. And then organizing the subsections in a more logical way. The structure should be more in keeping with what SACS requires for sub change. And I'm hoping that you all will jump in if we need better alignment. And then definitions. In fact, what you'll see today is a lot of new definitions that really help us understand what we're trying to do. All right, then there is a second kind of partner section that I just alluded to, which has to do with program status. So inactive status is the only thing that's treated in this section. It was amended 25 years ago in 1997. It doesn't deal with anything that is, other program statuses, and I would recommend putting all those there. So typical programs are active, We could also talk about deleted. Moved is an open question, but we'll talk about that. All right. And another reminder, I know this one is a little bit small. Let me see if I can make the screen a hair bigger for y'all. Oh, nope, that just made it worse. Okay, so this was a chart that we put together during our last open forum sessions, which were, like I said, about a year ago. And we discussed the reorganization of this chapter, and you'll see this reflected in the document, to be divided into two main sections, aside from, all the pro forma sections that are what is the purpose, the commission responsibility, the scope, definitions, and then really the policy is two sections, which are here represented in blue, light blue, and then dark blue. So changes to degrees would be all together, and then changes to 4-credit non-degree certificates would all be together. And we agreed on 3 categories for degrees. So the policy we're hoping to move forward would be organized in this way to align with SACS. So the first one requiring the most scrutiny would be substantive change to a degree requiring approval. Then a substantive change to a degree requiring notification. And then thirdly is non-substantive, which AIC doesn't need to know about. On the certificate side, we're proposing substantive with notification and non-substantive. So there's nothing going on with the certificates that would rise to the level of needing approval, because adding a new one is already just done by notification. Okay, are y'all with me so far? Okay, I'm not hearing anyone pop in with questions, but please do, or write them in the chat if you have them. Oh, we got a chat. Oh, looks good. Thank you, Bliss. Okay. So this was our initial brainstorm last year around the kinds of actions that you all take that would need to be reflected somewhere in this policy. Okay, so on the program side, we've got the ones that require the highest level of scrutiny, which are the ones that our commission needs to approve. We're not talking about adding anything new here, but this would be clearer. Take one program and split it into 2. So this does sometimes happen where there's an option that a program wants to elevate to a standalone degree. We just saw one of these actually in our last meeting, which was called a substantive modification. There was a master's degree, I believe it's at Auburn, in the business program, wanted to elevate their Master of Finance option into its own degree. So the existing one would happen, stay there, and then there would be a new offshoot. And this would require approval because we're talking about adding a new entry to the academic program inventory. And in that case, there's not really going to be a review of viability because the option already existed and the existing program is viable. And so we would need to be more specific about that in the rules. We can also talk about the other direction where a single program, or there are 2 programs that for whatever reason want to merge into one program. Often this does have to do with the viability of the 2 separate programs, and together they would be a viable program, but separately they are struggling. And the doctoral program nomenclature, I do believe this goes way back to the way the policy was before, that there is interest in having extra scrutiny on doctoral programs when they change nomenclature. Specifically, you don't want it to be too easy to change your doctoral degree to a PhD, I think is the theory behind that. Then there should be scrutiny and an opportunity to comment and change and review by the graduate deans and so forth. Lastly, program changes greater than 50%. So this was this language we talked about to align better with the SAC's new sub-change policy. When the program is over 50%, they need approval, and so we would like to match that. All right, on the requiring notification. So this is where I would go on a meetings information items. You know, we keep those lists. AIC does require prior notification, and the policy would still say that. So this is the title change for your degree program. You want to change a SIP, nomenclature, status, and the status again is that active, inactive, or if it's going to be deleted. And I actually think that I should have highlighted this to say, well, that's illegible. Should have highlighted this to say that we would like this to be in the other section of the policy. So I'm gonna make this awkward. Don't you hate it when people are watching you and your Microsoft PowerPoint is not working? Okay, there we go. So this, I think, should go into the next section on status change. Curriculum updates, and then options. Non-substantive, the goal here is not to make more work for anyone, but we already don't want to be notified about course updates, minors, program changes less than 25%, and modality, we do need to talk about that a little bit. But unless the modality is changing to 100% distance education, which is covered under another section of our rules. All right, y'all are with me. Then on the 4-credit non-degree certificate side, one outstanding question that's highlighted here is about options for certificates and whether it really makes sense for certificates to have options or whether the option would constitute enough to just be a new certificate, which would frankly be my preference. All right, y'all with me so far?
Yes.
Natalie, thank you. Okay, well, I know the moment y'all have been waiting for, which is looking at the language that I want to propose. So I had dropped it into the chat, and for those of you who joined late, you may not see it in your chat, but it will definitely be posted. And if someone else wants to repost it while I'm talking, then that would be very welcome. All right, so we're talking about extensions and alterations. You see here, new rule. Now, that is language that the Legislative Services Agency uses when you quote unquote repeal and replace. And I think in this case, you'll see that the changes are so fundamental and throughout that it just makes sense for there to be a new rule rather than to try and do an amendment of the existing rule. So in terms of our notation here, Legislative Services has adopted a slightly different way of doing things now, which is good for everyone. Blue is now going to be the new text, and existing text is going to appear in black. And then text that existed that we want to get rid of will be in red with strike through. Excuse me. And as far as plans go, depending on the feedback we get today and after today, we are hoping that we can bring forward this language for preliminary review at the commission meeting in December. And those of you who've been around, you know that we have to do it twice, preliminary review. That kicks off the official public feedback process that Legislative Services Agency manages. And then once that closes, depending on what feedback we get, we would then bring forward a final version for our commission to approve in March. And it would then become effective 45 days after that. Okay, so we're still looking at a long runway, but if we want it to happen by the end of the academic year, you got to get the first round on the December meeting. Okay, so purpose, this wasn't there before. It's pretty straightforward. Making sure that basically we can tell the difference between what's a reasonable change and what's a new program, which is in keeping with the Code of Alabama that deals with new programs. We're trying to keep, a comprehensive record for our academic program inventory. And we've got our scope for programs of instruction offered by you all. It's very clearly stating not non-credit programs or those that don't lead to some kind of award. So as in just courses. All right, definitions, and you all may see definitions that are missing or to have quibbles with the definitions that are here. But hopefully this will all get us on the same page, and you'll see the majority of this policy that we're hoping to bring forward is really just definitions that were not really spelled out in the previous version. So program inventory, I'm sure those of you who are on the call are familiar with this. You see it on the agendas for our meetings. But we do have a database where we keep a record of each academic program, and that database is used to validate the completions for every year when AIC collects the data in tandem with IPEDS to keep our database of student enrollment and completions up to date. Then the program inventory is used to match student completers to the program so they completed it. And this is one of the, main functions of our agency. Okay, alteration, typically you see extensions and alterations, but we define them separately. The definitions are proceeding alphabetically. Type of change that modifies existing program within its scope, and a couple of examples. Credit hour, and this should match with the standard definition of credit hour from IPEDS. And you'll stop me if you see questions. CIP code, we all know this is one of the things that gets changed through extensions and alterations. And we tried to be, as broad as possible in describing it. One thing we did add here at the end was SIP code should accurately reflect content of instruction and allow for comparison of programs. So if this sometimes does happen, we get requests for a new program and we will say, oh, we like your program, but we think it should be a different SIP code. And the reason for that is basically this, reflecting the content and allow for comparison. So this could open up some kind of future guideline that's not an administrative procedure or rule that could describe what it means to have a SIP code that doesn't or does describe the content of your program and that sort of thing. That's something we'd like to do, because right now we, provide this kind of one-off guidance unless it's the 10-year SIP code revision. All right, delivery modalities. So I've highlighted this in yellow because I wanted to talk with you all about it. This definition was developed for the policy that's currently under consideration for distance education. The distance education one was heard for preliminary at the AIC meeting in September, and it basically says if you're making a program that's 100% distance education, you need to let AIC know ahead of time. If it's less than 100%, you don't need to let us know. And delivery modality is defined in that policy, similar, the exact same language here. Now, I did have this question come up recently. What about competency-based? So I know you all have to give notification to SAC COC when you are changing curriculum into competency-based format. And what I need your help in thinking about is that delivery modality, or is competency-based curriculum described falls under some other category?
I will say that UWA just submitted a change to SAC-COC and it was considered a modality. And we did ask that question specifically from our VP, because there is a competency-based substantive change kind of separate from the modality. But in our case, it was considered under that modality type as being a substantive change. So I don't know if that helps.
So, but it sounds like there could be other cases where it's not. Is that where your VP was going?
Yes, well, there's a whole other type of substantive change that's just competency based, and I can forward that to you. But then there's competency based is also listed amongst modality types, and there's the 3 different types, like online and then face to face, and then there's competency based. And so she guided us to choose that criteria as far as what would this be listed as a substantive change for SAC-COC. And that's what we did.
Okay.
I can forward that to you if you want.
Yeah, that's fine. What do others feel about this? Because where I'm going with this is AIC doesn't want to receive all the notifications about changes to competency-based. This is something that we trust you all on. You're already having to notify SAC-COC about it. But we want to be clear in our policy what we do and don't need notification for. And if there are cases where changes to competency-based aren't considered a modality change, it sounds like Bliss, yours was, and that SACS is not totally consistent on this among themselves, then we also want to be clear we don't want to know about that either. So we could make it its own definition. And that would allow us to talk about it, but I don't want to leave it out because I want there to be some clarity here. Nobody? All right, well, my proposal then is going to be that we make it a definition. And that way it could be under delivery modality or not. So what will we call it? Competency-based curriculum. If you want clarity, I would make it, yeah. Thanks, Lori. That's where I was inclined.
That sounds good.
SAC-COC says there's 3 methods of delivery. One of those is competency-based education, and then the other is distance education and face-to-face instruction. So I don't know if that helps.
It
Yeah.
does. Mm-hmm.
Competency-based education.
That's right.
Okay. And what's that SACS policy called, Liz?
This is method of delivery by approval. If you're looking at the subchange policy and procedures, it's page 41. But it's method of delivery by approval.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to make this note to myself. And
the other instance, Robin, if you want to look at it, where they reference competency-based is competency-based education by direct assessment,
okay.
which I think is much different, but that's the other.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That I can see why that would not
Yes.
be a modality. Okay.
Right.
So that would be, yes, it would be better not to confuse those. All right, so we'll add it in there. Anybody else? Yeah, people are agreeing. Okay. All right, so we'll look up and add that in, and luckily they're right next to each other, so then we can just keep this and we'll take it out from here and leave it there. All right, Extension. So we talked about alteration before, extension being something that expands an offering beyond its previously defined scope. And here are some examples. Oh, thank you, Ginger. Open this just so that I've got it. Okay. All right, iPads, we all know what that is. And then I'm unsure why these terms were never defined in the original policy, but nomenclature, this is, we call it a word name. There is sometimes confusion around this, but this is the, what appears on the student's diploma, I guess, plus the discipline. So the nomenclature plus the discipline or field makes the full title. And or maybe it's followed by the program title. And sometimes we do get confused with the abbreviations y'all use internally and the actual nomenclature of the degree. So we will often ask follow-up questions to make sure we get it right. Option. So here we have not been overly specific about how much an offering needs to be related to the existing program of instruction. The current policy, if y'all have ever seen it, is very specific and confusing about at the undergraduate level, it has to share 50% of coursework, but at the graduate level, it's a third of the coursework and there are hours involved, and it's confusing. If there is a desire to be more specific about how closely the program has to be related, we can do that. But my inclination is to be more flexible, and that allows us to, make decisions based on the individual circumstances that we are presented with. Y'all have feedback on that? All right, this was an error. We didn't mean to leave this blank. Nope, everybody's good so far. All right, let me take that off. Okay, so L will be program of instruction. All right, so this should match what appears in other parts of the policy. And again, this is going to mirror what we just saw on the, that PowerPoint where we had the two branches, one for degrees and one for credit non-degree. All right, so first degrees are defined up under new program proposals. So instead of repeating it, we're just going to refer back to where that was before. And it is organized the same way as what you see below here, which is all these designations under iPads. And so we all know they're the same ones that are here. iPads 2, 3, 5, 7, 17, 18, 19, and EdS. Okay, back to our, all right, on the 4 credit non-degree. So here's where we need some input. So we all know what the certificates are, but we have discovered through conversations with some of you that iPads has an additional level that AIC has not typically described before. So iPads specifically distinguishes between the level 1A and 1B, where the 1B corresponds to short-term certificates, and then the 1A is a much smaller unit of study. And what I need your input on, because we would like to be able to recognize the difference, some of our institutions have asked us to think about this, is what to call 1A. We already have names for short-term certificate, post-baccalaureate, long certificate, those things. But 1A, we haven't typically had a name for, and I was proposing badge. I do not feel a strong commitment to that. There are certainly areas where badge can be for non-credit, and we don't want to create confusion. What are your thoughts, Natalie? I saw you pop in.
Yeah, I was going to say, Robin, that I think badge is used so often in the non-credit world that we might not want to use that, but I can't think of anything else yet. I'm still thinking.
Stacy, are you trying to hop in?
I am. So we have defined this at Jacksonville State University. We looked at what our graduate certificates and undergraduate certificates, what those hours were, and then defined a micro credential based on what the certificate programs were. And we were aligning badges with micro credentials. And these are for credit. And our micro credentials are defined as 6 to 11 hours because our certificate programs start at 12 hours.
Okay, so there's a bit of a mismatch with the hours. So let me talk about the hours first, and then we'll talk about the name. So the hours 6 to 9 is, I believe, what iPads has, if I'm not mistaken. And I also know that the community colleges have a policy on how many hours are needed for an STC. What is the minimum for that? Can somebody remind me? ACCS folks,
I'm sorry, what did you say, Robin?
what is the minimum number of hours for STC?
29,
That's the maximum. What's the minimum?
9.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so ACCS is matching the definition that iPads is, which is what we hoped. So I don't know that we would, I think we would encourage you to match, or else those that are crossed over, the ones where you've got some that might be 9, 10, or 11, that would be considered a 1B. Do you see where I'm going, Stacy? That's a particular situation to y'all.
Okay.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's the case. But on the naming, you suggested micro-credential. And for those who've been on this conversation long enough, we know that micro-credentials for the whole state have caused confusion about what is or isn't considered. And we have reached the conclusion that us trying to call something a micro-credential is going to be too disruptive to the nomenclatures that have been adopted already. And there's confusion with the non-credit. So we don't want to go with micro-credential is what I'm saying. So what else have we got in the chat? Oh, Christina or Rena, you told us where the glossary is. Thank you. The other idea, which is very pedantic, could be as simple as a very short-term certificate. Excuse me. So short-term certificate and a very short-term, a short-term, a 1A certificate. So we've decided against badge, but anybody have a feeling about, of those kind of pedantic, non-confusing options, what might be good?
Well, there's been some others that have used like nano degree or nano cert, something like that to indicate something smaller.
I like that. Like a nano certificate, but 2 words. Even though nano is a prefix, I think.
Yeah, it's usually hyphenated.
Okay.
Or they've got like mini degree, mini cert. I've heard several different ones from the, more the certification type world.
I like the way nano certificate sounds, but mini certificate might be more clear. 10 years from now, or hopefully we'll review this before 10 years, but
Well, remember, the last time this one was reviewed was longer,
yeah. So maybe mini certificate, I don't know, either one is fine with me, but mini certificate I think is more clear. Nano just sounds sexier, for lack of better terminology.
Yeah. American University uses nano certificates, yes. And I do think they are yeah, it is something that has a kind of sexy name. It sounds very scientific, and they have the term trademark. Okay, well, that solves that problem. Okay, so are there any objections to mini certificate? All right, we're gonna go with that. If y'all think about it later and you realize that that's not gonna work for some reason, email us. I see some thumbs up. Thank you, guys. All right, is mini smaller than micro? I don't know. I guess the other option, maybe I'm interpreting you correctly, Rena, is to suggest micro certificate. So not micro credential, but micro certificate. All right, so here's what I'm gonna propose. Y'all write in the chat which name you want. And at the end of this, I will look and see which one is the most frequent. So let's go for a mini certificate or a micro certificate, which might get back to Stacy's original suggestion. Okay, I'll keep it coming. And you will collate them after the meeting. All right, so we're okay with short-term certificate. Those are our existing names. Post-baccalaureate certificate. This is also known as the graduate certificates. And we tried to make it clear that most graduate certificates are these. There are only some cases where we might have the postmaster's certificate. And postmasters, this is a level 8, are usually for specialized fields that have specialized training. Also, for those of you who are really into the IR, you may know that EdSs are also considered level 8s postmasters, but we are not talking about EdSs here. They're considered a degree, so they're under that other side. All right. More ideas, feedback on any of these definitions?
Robin, since I know that we have some folks who, this is Tanja, by the way, who might, feel somewhat strongly about this particular one, but they're not on the call, should we just have them to send thoughts to you directly?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yes, we definitely want any and all feedback. We are, I think I mentioned earlier that there is an official public input period, which would start after we post these to our commission and they give it preliminary review. So we're ahead of that and we want to be transparent and take any and all feedback. And we will continue to receive feedback all the way through that public period. All right, so other things, program status. Again, this is the active, inactive, deleted. And those refer to whether it's enrolling new students. And the proposal is to move the status stuff down to the next section on status. Program title. And the only, I guess, subjective part here is that closely correspond with the CIP standardized name. We want there to be, some individualization for your institution, but not to the extent that it's suggesting a different CIP code. All right, reasonable. So this is one of the few sections that appears with some black text, as in it came from the previous policy. I gave you all some of the rest of it that we are recommending to be deleted because this would be treated down below, and it's also not really falling in consistency with the categories we're proposing of substantive approval, substantive notification, non-substantive. And it refers to operational definitions from 1994. It's hard to maintain credibility when you're referring to things that don't. All right, but the rest of it, we, tried to keep as much as we could. Okay, and here's where, we do need to give more language describing everything. But the goal here is to assign different kinds of changes in keeping with our, change sections here to the different parts of the policy. So as long as you will help us put it in the right section, we will add in the language to describe it correctly. All right, so change, this is similar to what you saw on that PowerPoint. Let's see if I can get them both in the same screen. You all tell me if I'm squeezing too much in here. All right, everybody can see me, right? Yep. All right, award nomenclature at the doctoral level. Yeah, merging programs, splitting programs, changes to curriculum over 50%. And we'll describe, a sentence of what each of those things are. Notification only, this would be the addition of options. Updates to program inventory, SIPs titles, status change will go in the next section, and then changes to curriculum between 25 and 49. Now, while we're here on options for degrees, typically AIC has always included the addition of options. So that would be the concentration, specialization track. In recent, I would say over the past 2 or 3 years, we have also received a lot of notifications about the deletion or changes to options. And some of that seems to be driven by the kinds of paperwork that you all have to provide to SACS as part of your applications for substantive change or notifications. And we certainly want to make it easier for y'all to compile the paperwork you need. We also don't want to necessarily put ourselves in the position of being the, what I would like to call the options police, where we're trying to keep track of every option as it is current and has been and future will be status. We, in our new program inventory system, have been trying to keep track of options, and it is like trying to capture the wind, basically. There are so many options that already exist that aren't in the system, most of which have been notified to us, but going back through the records, updating the minor title changes, this is a task that is very involved. So I wanted to open the discussion about options, namely we do need some kind of notification when an option is added. But how much do y'all actually need when you change the title of an option, discontinue an option, or somehow otherwise modify them?
Robin, I feel your pain. I can't imagine trying to keep up with options at your level. We have a hard time keeping up with them at the university. I feel like if options are not going to be cataloged anywhere, that they don't need to be reported at all.
Well, that, that is a kind of the fullest logical progression of it. The one thing I will say is that options, there does, I think, need to be a determination of whether an option rises to the level of a new program.
Correct.
And that is something that the commission has done historically, or at least the commission staff has done. And the legislation or the law that authorizes the commission to review programs does mention that specifically, being able to define the difference between new program and an extension. So I want to be able to preserve that moment of clarity where we decide whether you know, this really is just trying to slip in a new degree under the name of an option, not that anybody does that. Or if that really, you know, is a reasonable extension and then we add it. Even if we don't keep track of the whole list of all the options and its past and future iterations. What do y'all think? Does this seem like a sensible concern?
Let me see Stacy's question in the chat.
I didn't, sorry, I'm looking at y'all in my video and not paying attention. Is an option concentration within major? Yes. Some folks call it concentration. Some call it, and I'll just bring us back up to the section where we defined what an option was. Can be referred to as concentration track or specialization. You may have your own name, but I think of it as something that appears along with the degree in the course bulletin, you know, the official catalog where it defines what the requirements for the degree. If there is some subset of specific courses that goes and gets an extra endorsement or something, that would be considered an option. Would there be a concern that an institution was trying to run another program without applying for a sub change? Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Rena? Are you saying the concern is from SACS or the concern is from us? Oh, okay. Maybe your audio isn't working. My arts experience, okay, tell us. And I will say, while she's typing, there's at least one institution who we have been talking with where in the past there had been an adding of degrees under the same CIP code that were intended to be standalone degrees, but because they were closely aligned with an existing degree, they basically just went in as an option. And that's what we're trying to make it clear that we don't want going forward, that somebody has to be kind of looking to make sure that the option is not its own degree. Okay, so as Rena says, she does accreditation for art, she's a musician, and they monitor this carefully. Title and content alignment, Bachelor of Music and Performance, concentration in music theory. So that's the same kind of difference that we're trying to capture. The question is on future changes. So basically, I think we can all agree that the addition of a concentration needs some kind of review, right? And the question is, what about subsequent changes? So title changes to the concentration, deletion of the concentration. Those seem to only make sense if you're keeping track of a whole list. And I might be inclined to not need anything for that. But like I said, we've been getting requests from institutions to include this on our, commission notification, because you're obviously having to send something to SACS to say that this has been reviewed. So maybe you can help tease it out just a little bit.
We don't have to send anything to SACS regarding concentrations. So, and I think one of the issues that I face is trying to, because I think this thing happens unintentionally, what you're talking about, using concentrations instead of degree programs, because of the definition of concentrations is not well defined. And I feel that people can circumvent the process, as Katarina noted. It happens quite frequently. And unless you set some very specific parameters, like a concentration can only be so many hours, I prefer to talk about a concentration as a way of advising students to identify an area of interest in their studies using electives.
Mhm. Okay, and that sounds actually very similar to a minor.
No, a
Mm,
minor is a different program of study in another discipline, is a smaller program. It's not as large as a major. It could be, but it's in another discipline altogether. The concentration
Right,
is within
okay.
the major.
Yeah, no, I'm following you there, but they are both, okay. We'll just say I got off a little track. Thank you.
Okay.
Ginger.
No problem.
Okay, let me see where I was. The original policy does have hours in it. There was already a definition of concentration that says concentrations in a major must have 50% the same. Yes, that is part of the policy on the books now. And that original policy was somewhat internally inconsistent because somewhere else it says something else. So if we want to be clear, which is the goal here, is to be clear, then if we want to have thresholds, like at least 50% of the same, the program core has to overlap by 50%. We can definitely put that in here. Just trying to see if I've got the old version that I can show y'all what the language actually says.
I think, Robin, if you do that, if you add whatever definition, I'm not saying it needs to be 50%, but if you define that, then it'll prevent the issues that everyone was concerned about with there being
Mhm.
kind of separate majors running within a major.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's something I think we're used to at most, even in other states.
Is 50% kind of a commonly known threshold?
I was in Kentucky and I think it was 49%.
Okay, so that matches with the, trying to see, okay, we got 6 here, we've got. Sorry, y'all, I know okay, if anybody wants to chime in and say what they think the threshold should be, 49, 50, what would make more sense with SAC's policy? Here we go, this is what I was looking for. The existing one, so we're looking at 6. Okay. Section on options, so you can see that this is just all very listy. It's not particularly well defined here. Anybody sees it, stop me. Option, okay. Must be closely related to the major. And again, I guess we're talking about undergraduate majors here. Half option must be less than half of the total credits. Fewer hours than a minor. Has to have a common core, which we were calling the program core for the option, which is at least 50% of the major. But you could have an exception in certain circumstances. So I have found this section to be sometimes difficult to understand. But if this, I'm also inclined to keep something that's there if it makes sense to everyone else. So how do y'all feel about the section that's currently there? And minors, obviously, yeah, like we talked about, we're not, minors or something else, and AIC doesn't want to know about minors. We're not trying to do that. So we're really just interested in the option concentration section. And I know we're getting close to time here, so. So are there objections to keeping the language around 50%? I think this is probably the clearest version. Which is at least 50%, must be at least half. Okay, so we got the thumbs up. Nobody's chiming in to say, whoa, Nelly's, this doesn't make sense, so we'll keep that. I'll put that back in. Let me go back to my document. Options. With program. All right, so I'll figure out where to put that in. And then other changes aside the addition of options, I think we realized that addition of options is we need to review, but other things relating to options, we don't want to know about. All good with us? Okay. All right, lastly, non-credit. Again, this is kind of, we're just talking about this other side of my diagram here, changes to non-credit. That we would want to know when things, because these are their own entry in our inventory. Obviously, we need to know when they're added. We want to know when they're deleted. And if there are SIP or title changes, that we would like to know. Hours change. So this is something we've started to try and keep track of. And I'm not sure if it's something that, you know, changes frequently, that we would need to keep track of frequently, or if we just kind of keep track that it's, you know, it stays in the same category, like moving from 1A to 1B would need us to know something happened, but otherwise, I believe it would probably be non-substantive. You know, I hope y'all are generally good with that. 1A to 1B, but otherwise, no. We don't want to know about course updates, minors, program changes less than 25%. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, I know we are at our final minutes. And I did say that some of the status change stuff I wanted to put in the next section. And let's plan to go through that the next time. So we've got another one of these scheduled 2 weeks from now. During that session, I think I had originally planned for us to talk about definitions or any other outstanding changes. So I'll take what we've done today and work up the status change stuff. And we'll plan to talk about that along with definitions and any other pet peeves that you all have about the academic procedures. We can bring those up in general. But my hope is that once we make it through these extensions, alterations, that we will, you know, be at a good stopping point for now. There's always more we can do, but gotta draw a line under it somewhere. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.